The sound of metal grinding against metal tore through the cabin of the CH-47 Chinook like a dying animal's final scream. Black smoke billowed from the left engine, curling through the cargo bay in thick, suffocating waves. 18 souls clung to whatever they could find. Seat straps, cargo zoo netting, each other, as the massive helicopter lurched sideways through the Afghan night sky. "Somebody get that girl out of the cockpit!" Staff Sergeant Mason Webb roared, shoving his way through the tangle of panicking soldiers. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with shoulders like a refrigerator, and right now, his face was twisted with the kind of fury that made lesser men step aside. He jabbed a thick finger toward the small woman occupying the co-pilot's seat. "She's just a rookie on a training assignment. She's going to kill us all." Raven Mitchell didn't turn around. Her hands moved across the instrument panel with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. Checking gauges, flipping switches, her movements economical and deliberate despite the chaos erupting behind her. She was unremarkable at first glance. 5'5", slender build, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. The kind of woman who disappeared into a crowd. The kind of woman men like Mason Webb looked right through. "Listen to me, sweetheart." Mason grabbed her shoulder, his grip hard enough to bruise. He spun her chair halfway around, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Women don't belong in the cockpit when everything's on fire. Let the men handle this." Captain Derek Holloway, the aircraft commander, lay slumped against the side of his seat. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead where he'd struck the doorframe when the first explosion hit. His breathing was shallow, irregular. No one knew if he was going to make it. Raven looked at Mason for exactly 1 second. Just one. But something in that look made the big man hesitate. A flicker of something cold and ancient behind her dark eyes, like catching a glimpse of a predator through tall grass. Then she turned back to the controls as if he didn't exist. "RPG! Another RPG incoming!" someone screamed from the rear of the aircraft. The helicopter banked hard, bodies tumbled, equipment crashed. And in that moment of pure chaos, no one noticed that Raven had already begun moving, her hands dancing across the console with a speed and certainty that had no business belonging to a rookie fresh from flight school. They didn't know it yet. None of them did. But in the next 20 minutes, everything they thought they knew about this quiet, unremarkable woman was about to shatter into a million pieces. The Chinook's twin rotors screamed in protest as Raven fought to stabilize the wounded aircraft. Red warning lights painted the cockpit in hellish hues, and the acrid smell of burning hydraulic fluid mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Through the forward windscreen, the Kunar Province mountains loomed like black teeth against the pre-dawn sky, beautiful and deadly, the kind of terrain that had been swallowing helicopters and their crews since the Soviets first learned to fear Afghan soil. In the cargo bay, 18 people struggled to make sense of the situation. This was supposed to be a routine medevac run. Pick up 3 wounded soldiers from a forward operating base. Transport them to Bagram. Simple, safe, the kind of mission they gave to flight crews with new co-pilots who needed hours logged in their books. Master Sergeant Caleb Morrison pressed his back against the fuselage and watched the chaos unfold with the practiced calm of a man who had seen worse. 22 years in the Rangers had taught him to observe first, react second. Right now, he was observing the woman in the co-pilot's seat, and what he saw didn't add up. The way she sat, the angle of her shoulders, the economy of her movements. He'd seen that before, in operators, in the quiet professionals who did the jobs no one talked about. But that was impossible. She was just a pilot, transferred in 3 days ago from some training unit in the States. Her file said so. Everyone said so. So, why did his instincts keep screaming that something was wrong? "Can someone tell me what the hell is happening?" Private First Class Blake Harris shouted, his voice cracking with barely contained panic. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of face that still looked like it belonged in a college fraternity rather than a war zone. "Why is the rookie still flying? We need someone with experience." "Experience!" Sergeant First Class Heather Cross spat the word like a curse. She was crouched near the medical station, her angular features twisted with contempt. "I told them this was a mistake. Putting some green pilot on a combat rotation? Might as well paint a target on the aircraft." Dr. Lieutenant Fiona Hayes looked up from where she was stabilizing Captain Holloway. She was a trauma surgeon, 43 years old, with the kind of steady hands that came from years of cutting people open and putting them back together. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "we should focus on surviving before we assign blame." But Heather wasn't listening. She never did when she had a target. I've seen pilots like her before. Diversity hires, box checkers. Probably got this assignment because some general needed to hit his quota. In the cockpit, Raven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Almost. But she didn't respond. She simply adjusted the collective and watched the altitude indicator with an intensity that bordered on meditation. Mason had positioned himself directly behind her seat now, his massive frame blocking the narrow cockpit entrance. All right, that's enough. I'm taking over. Move. Raven's hands remained on the controls. Negative. That wasn't a request, sweetheart. And that wasn't a negotiation. Her voice was flat, colorless, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had stopped caring about social niceties a very long time ago. For a moment, Mason seemed genuinely stunned. He wasn't used to being refused, especially not by women half his size. His face darkened. You want to do this the hard way? Fine. He reached for her again, but this time something different happened. His hand closed on empty air. Raven had shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, just a subtle redistribution of weight that placed her exactly where his grab couldn't reach. It was so smooth, so effortless, that Mason almost didn't register what had happened. Caleb Morrison did, though. He saw it. And the alarm bells in his head grew louder. The aircraft is still flyable, Raven said, her eyes never leaving the instruments. Left engine is compromised, but the right is maintaining. Hydraulics are at 63%. We have approximately 7 minutes before we need to be on the ground. How do you know? Because I can read gauges, Staff Sergeant. Can you? The question hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Mason's face went purple with rage, but before he could respond, the radio crackled to life. Spectre 27, this is Overlord Actual. We have you on radar. What is your status? Over? Raven keyed the mic with practiced efficiency. Overlord Actual, Spectre 27. We have taken RPG fire. 1 engine down. Commander is injured and unconscious. I have the aircraft. Requesting emergency vector to nearest suitable LZ. Over. There was a pause on the other end. Then, Spectre 27, confirm. Who is speaking? Co-pilot Mitchell. I have control. Another pause. Copy Mitchell. Be advised, all primary LZs are hot. Enemy activity reported across the valley. Recommend you attempt RTB to... The radio dissolved into static as another explosion rocked the aircraft. Closer this time. The enemy was bracketing them, walking their fire closer with each shot. We're not going to make it back to base, Raven said, more to herself than anyone else. We need to put down. Now. She banked the helicopter hard right, and through the windscreen, a narrow valley appeared between 2 mountain ridges. It was tight, impossibly tight, with steep walls on either side, and a rocky floor that looked about as welcoming as a bed of nails. You can't land there! Flynn Brennan pushed his way into the cockpit, his technician's mind already calculating the impossibility. He was thin and wiry, with the perpetually anxious look of someone who understood exactly how many things could go wrong with a helicopter. That terrain is completely unsuitable. The approach angle alone, I know. The rotor clearance, I know. No pilot can... Watch me. Raven's hands moved to a configuration that made Flynn's eyes widen. He knew helicopters. He'd been maintaining them for 8 years. And what she was setting up wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't in any manual. It was something else entirely. That's a Night Stalker approach, he whispered. That's 1/60th SOAR technique. How do you know? Everyone brace. Raven's voice cut through the cabin, suddenly louder, suddenly carrying an authority that seemed to fill every corner of the aircraft. Crash positions, now. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was something more fundamental, the kind of command that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to survival instincts. Every person in that helicopter moved. Even Mason Webb found himself grabbing a handhold before his brain caught up with his body. Before we continue with this incredible story, I want to remind you that if you're new here, this channel brings you the most intense military stories every week. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and moments that will leave you speechless. If you don't want to miss what happens next to Raven and the 18 souls trapped in that falling helicopter, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell right now. Trust me, you won't regret it. The next 90 seconds would live in the memories of everyone aboard for the rest of their lives. Raven Mitchell flew that crippled Chinook through a needle's eye of rock and darkness. her hands making constant micro-adjustments that no computer could replicate. The rotors came within feet of the canyon walls. The tail boom scraped stone at one point, sending sparks showering into the night. But she held it. Somehow, impossibly, she held it. When the helicopter finally touched down, hard but controlled, a textbook emergency landing that military academies would study for years, there was a moment of absolute silence, the kind of silence that only comes after someone has looked death in the face and lived. Then Private Jimmy O'Brien, barely 19 years old and on his first deployment, said what everyone was thinking. Holy cow, did that just happen? Specialist Logan Pierce, the unit's intel analyst, was staring at Raven through the cockpit door. He was 26, quiet, the kind of soldier who noticed things other people missed. Right now, he was noticing a lot of things. The way she was already unbuckling her harness, the way her breathing hadn't changed at all, the way she reached for the M4 carbine mounted beside her seat and checked its chamber with a fluidity that spoke of thousands of repetitions. That wasn't flying, Logan murmured. That was something else. Corporal Grace Wheeler, the medic, was helping Dr. Hayes move Captain Holloway to a more stable position. Is he going to make it? Fiona checked his pupils. Concussion, definitely. Maybe a skull fracture. He needs a hospital, but he's stable for now. She glanced toward the cockpit. That landing saved his life. Another hard impact and the brain swelling could have killed him. Mason Webb was the first to recover his voice, though it took him longer than he would have liked. That was luck, he said, but his tone had lost some of its earlier conviction. Pure dumb luck. Any pilot would be dead, Flynn Brennan interrupted, his voice hollow. I've been in aviation for 8 years. I've never seen anyone fly like that. Ever. So, she got lucky once. That doesn't mean... Staff Sergeant? Caleb Morrison's quiet voice cut through the argument like a knife. The veteran ranger had moved to the cockpit door and was watching Raven with an expression that mixed curiosity with something that might have been recognition. Maybe we should focus on our current situation before we continue this debate. The current situation, as it turned out, was not good. They had landed in a valley approximately 7 miles from the nearest friendly position. The terrain was rough, mountainous, with limited cover and multiple approaches that would favor attackers. The helicopter was grounded, possibly repairable, but not quickly. They had 18 people, including one seriously injured commander, limited ammunition, and no reliable communication with base. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the enemy who had shot them down was almost certainly moving to finish the job. Raven had already exited the aircraft and was conducting a perimeter assessment. She moved differently now that they were on the ground, lower, more fluid, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain in a pattern that had nothing to do with pilot training. Caleb watched her circle the downed helicopter, noting the way she used Chibutad automatically, the way she checked sight lines and dead ground without conscious thought. Something's wrong with that picture, Noah Lawson muttered. He was the door gunner, a burly Texan with a voice like gravel and a reputation for stating the obvious. Pilots don't move like that. No, Caleb agreed, they don't. Mason had followed Raven outside, clearly unwilling to let the earlier confrontation go. Hey, we need to establish a command structure here. The captain's down, which means you need to establish a defensive perimeter on the eastern ridge, Raven said without looking at him. She was studying something in the dirt. Tracks maybe, or disturbance patterns. The enemy will most likely approach from that direction. It offers the best cover for their movement. I wasn't asking for your opinion. I wasn't offering one. I was telling you what needs to happen. Listen here. No, you listen. Raven finally turned to face him, and something in her posture made Mason take an involuntary step backward. She hadn't moved aggressively. She hadn't raised her voice. But suddenly she seemed larger somehow, more present, as if the quiet woman from the cockpit had been replaced by someone else entirely. We have approximately 30 to 40 minutes before enemy forces reach our position. That's based on their likely staging area, their movement speed through this terrain, and the time it takes to organize a follow-up assault after an air-to-ground engagement. In that 30 to 40 minutes, we need to establish defensive positions, treat our wounded, assess our communication options, and prepare for a fight. Now, you can either help with that, or you can continue arguing with me, but I strongly suggest you choose the first option. Mason opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Behind him, Heather Cross sneered. Who put you in charge? Last I checked, you're just a... I'm the only pilot still conscious, Raven cut her off. And I'm the reason you're not scattered across a mountainside right now. That's who put me in charge. Any other questions? The silence that followed was answer enough. Speaking of survival situations, having the right medical gear can mean the difference between life and death. Whether you're a veteran, first responder, or just someone who wants to be prepared, a professional-grade tactical first aid kit is essential. Military-spec tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, the same equipment medics use in combat zones. Check the link in the description for recommended trauma kits that could save a life someday. Over the next 20 minutes, Raven transformed 18 frightened, disorganized survivors into something resembling a defensive unit. She positioned people based on their skills and equipment, established overlapping fields of fire, and created fallback positions in case the first line was breached. It was tactical art, the kind of thing that took years to learn and decades to master, and nobody could explain how a rookie pilot knew how to do it. Caleb Morrison found himself assigned to the northern approach with Jimmy O'Brien. The young private was still shaking from the crash landing, but he'd held himself together, better than some of the more experienced soldiers. There was steel in that kid, Caleb thought. He just didn't know it yet. Master Sergeant, Jimmy's voice was barely above a whisper. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. That woman, the pilot, she's not normal, is she? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, watching Raven move among the positions, making adjustments, offering brief words of instruction. No, he finally said. She's not. What do you think she really is? I think, Caleb said slowly, that's exactly the right question. Dr. Hayes had set up a triage station inside the helicopter's cargo bay, using it as the most protected position for the wounded. Captain Holloway was still unconscious but stable. She'd also treated 3 other soldiers with minor injuries from the crash, cuts, bruises, a possible sprained wrist. Nothing life-threatening, but every hurt body was one less rifle on the line. Raven appeared at the cargo door, and Fiona looked up from her work. Your landing saved lives, you know. Whatever else happens, you should know that. The mission isn't over yet. No? I suppose it isn't. Fiona hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. Earlier, when I was gathering supplies, I saw your arms, when your sleeve rode up. Raven's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. And those scars on your wrists, they're not from surgery, they're not from accidents. Fiona's voice dropped lower. I've worked in trauma medicine for 15 years. I've seen marks like that before, ligature wounds, the kind you get from being bound for extended periods. Doctor, I've treated POWs who came home with marks like that, people who were held by enemies who didn't follow the Geneva Convention. Fiona met Raven's gaze steadily. What happened to you? For a long moment, Raven said nothing. Then, it doesn't matter. It might. It doesn't. Raven pulled her sleeve down deliberately. What matters is getting these people home alive. Everything else is history. She was gone before Fiona could respond, melting back into the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost. Logan Pierce had been watching the exchange from across the cargo bay. He had his tablet out, a ruggedized military device with limited connectivity, and he had been running searches on their mysterious co-pilot. What he had found was interesting, or rather, what he hadn't found was interesting. Warrant Officer Raven Mitchell, age 38, transferred from pilot training cadre at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Before that, her record showed a series of unremarkable assignments, administrative posts, training units, the kind of career trajectory that suggested someone marking time until retirement. But there were gaps, strange gaps, periods of months or years where her service record simply went blank, marked with designations that Logan recognized from his intelligence work. Classified assignments, need-to-know access only. Pilots didn't have classified assignments, not routine pilots, not training cadre, unless they weren't really pilots at all. His fingers hovered over the search function. He could dig deeper, but doing so would leave digital fingerprints. It might trigger alerts. It might attract attention from people who didn't like being noticed. Then again, he thought, they were probably all going to die in the next few hours anyway. What did he have to lose? He entered a new search string and waited. The first contact came at 05:47 hours, exactly 32 minutes after they'd established their defensive positions. A scout, single figure, moving carefully through the rocks about 300 meters out. Noah Lawson spotted him first through his scope. Contact East Ridge, he reported over the tactical frequency, One packs, armed, moving toward our position. Raven's voice came back immediately. Hold fire. Let him report. I want to know how many we're dealing with. If we let him get away, he's already spotted us. Killing him won't change that. But if he reports back, we'll learn something from how they respond. Mason Webb was on the eastern perimeter, his earlier hostility temporarily submerged under the weight of immediate survival. He didn't like taking orders from the woman, but he also wasn't stupid enough to start an argument in the middle of potential combat. This is insane, Heather muttered over the radio. She's letting them know exactly where we are. They already know where we are, Raven replied. The crashed helicopter is kinda hard to miss. Despite himself, Flynn Brennan snorted. He was positioned near the tail section, nervously checking and rechecking his sidearm. He wasn't a combat soldier. He fixed helicopters. He didn't fight from them. But circumstances had made that distinction irrelevant. The scout withdrew. 10 minutes later, movement appeared across the eastern approach. More figures, at least a dozen, spreading out in a tactical formation that suggested training and discipline. That's not Taliban, Caleb observed quietly. That's not how Taliban move. No, Raven agreed. It's not. Who are they? That's a very good question. The first shots came at 0559. Enemy fire raked across their positions, forcing everyone into cover. The sound of AK-47s mixed with the sharper crack of what sounded like more modern weapons. Maybe M4s or some European equivalent. Return fire, Mason bellowed. Light them up. Controlled bursts only, Raven countermanded. Ammunition conservation. Make every round count. She's going to get us all killed, Heather spat, but she followed the order anyway. Self-preservation was a powerful motivator. What followed was 7 minutes of intense firefight that felt like 7 hours. The enemy was well coordinated, using fire and movement to pressure their perimeter from multiple angles. They weren't making a full assault, not yet, but they were testing defenses, probing for weaknesses, and they were finding them. We've got movement on the north side, Jimmy O'Brien's voice cracked over the radio. 3, maybe 4 guys working around our flank. I see them, Caleb responded. Engaging. Raven was already moving, flowing through the defensive positions like water through rocks. She appeared beside Jimmy without warning, startling the young private badly. Easy, she said. Show me what you're seeing. Jimmy pointed to a cluster of boulders about 100 meters out. They went behind those rocks. I've been watching, but they're not there anymore. Raven raised her rifle, and the way she raised it, the way her body settled into a shooting stance that looked carved from stone, made Jimmy's breath catch. They've moved left, using the depression. Watch. She fired 3 times. From behind a completely different set of rocks than where Jimmy had been looking, a figure tumbled into view and lay still. Jimmy stared at her. How did you... Later. Raven was already scanning for new targets. Keep your head down and your eyes open. Across the perimeter, similar scenes were playing out. Raven seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing at crisis points before they became critical, offering guidance that turned near disasters into held positions. She moved through the combat like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, because, though no one knew it yet, she had. Are you hooked yet? Because we're just getting started. Drop a comment below telling me what you think Raven's secret is. Is she really just a rookie, or is there something much deeper hiding beneath that quiet exterior? Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's find out together. The attack broke off as suddenly as it had begun. One moment the enemy was pressing hard. The next, they were melting back into the terrain, leaving behind 3 of their own who would never move again. In the aftermath, the defenders took stock. 2 wounded, both minor. Ammunition significantly depleted, but not critical. Morale complicated. That wasn't a real assault, Caleb said, finding Raven near the helicopter's tail. That was reconnaissance by fire. Yes, they're testing us, figuring out our capabilities before they commit to a full attack. Yes, and you knew that. You knew what they were doing from the beginning. Raven's eyes met his. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that had seen too much and forgotten how to be surprised by human cruelty. I've seen this pattern before. Where? She didn't answer. Caleb let the silence stretch. He was a patient man. He could wait. But before either of them could say more, Logan Pierce appeared at his elbow, face pale in the growing morning light. Master Sergeant, Mitchell. His voice was strange, tight, controlled, like someone trying very hard not to show shock. I found something. Something about our co-pilot. Raven turned to face him. Did you? I ran searches, deep searches, the kind that go places they're not supposed to go. Logan swallowed hard. Your service record has more black ink than actual information. There are references to units that officially don't exist, operations that never happened. And your personnel photo from 3 years ago matches a face in a classified briefing document about... Stop talking. Raven's voice cut through his words like a blade. Not threatening exactly, but absolutely final. Not here, not now. But whatever you found, whatever you think you know, it can wait until we're not in danger of being overrun by hostile forces. Understood? Logan looked like he wanted to argue. Then he looked at her eyes and changed his mind. Understood. Good. Now get back to your position. They'll hit us again within the hour. She was right, of course. They always seem to hit within the hour. Captain Holloway regained consciousness at 0632. His first words were a confused demand to know what was happening, followed by an immediate attempt to reassert command authority, despite barely being able to sit up. The co-pilot has been coordinating the defense, Fiona explained, helping him drink water. She brought us down safely and organized the perimeter. Holloway's eyes found Raven across the cargo bay. The rookie? She's been giving orders? She's been keeping us alive. That's not her job. That's not her place. Holloway tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Fiona caught him, forcing him back down. I need to speak with her, now. Raven appeared moments later, summoned by radio. She approached the captain with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. Mitchell, Holloway said, his voice still weak but edged with authority. I want a full briefing on our tactical situation. Yes, sir. She delivered it concisely. Enemy strength, defensive positions, ammunition status, casualty report, clinical, professional, utterly without emotion. When she finished, Holloway stared at her for a long moment. That's very thorough. More thorough than I'd expect from a pilot. I believe in being prepared, sir. I checked your file before this mission. Transfer from training command. Nothing special, nothing to suggest. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at their surroundings. Files can be incomplete, sir. Apparently. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Mason Webb has concerns about your appropriateness for this situation. He believes you've been overstepping your authority. Staff Sergeant Webb is welcome to assume tactical command whenever he feels ready. I'm sure his 2 decades of convoy duty have prepared him excellently for this scenario. The sarcasm was so dry, so perfectly delivered, that it took Holloway a second to register it. When he did, something that might have been a smile flickered across his pale face. You're not what you seem, are you, Mitchell? No one ever is, sir. Before Holloway could press further, the radio crackled with Noah's voice. Movement, multiple contacts, all approaches. This is it. They're coming in force. Raven was out of the helicopter before the transmission ended, her rifle already in her hands. Behind her, Holloway struggled to rise, finally accepting Fiona's help to reach a position where he could observe, if not participate. What he saw over the next 40 minutes would haunt his dreams for years. The enemy came in waves, not the disorganized rushes of irregular fighters, but coordinated assaults with suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and what appeared to be a clear chain of command. There were at least 30 of them, maybe more, and they were very, very good at what they did. The defenders held. Somehow, impossibly, they held. And at the center of that defense, moving like a force of nature, was Raven Mitchell. She didn't just fight, she conducted. Every movement, every shot, every decision flowed together into a symphony of controlled violence. When the eastern position nearly collapsed under concentrated fire, she was there, rallying the defenders and personally accounting for 4 enemy combatants. When ammunition ran low on the northern approach, she organized a redistribution that kept every position supplied without creating vulnerable gaps. And she did it all without raising her voice, without showing fear, without ever seeming to doubt that they would survive. Who is she? Jimmy O'Brien gasped during a brief lull. He was pressed into cover beside Grace Wheeler, both of them bleeding from minor wounds they hadn't had time to treat. Who the hell is she? Grace shook her head. I don't know, but I'm really glad she's on our side. Mason Webb had stopped arguing 20 minutes into the fight. Now he simply followed orders, his earlier hostility buried under the weight of undeniable evidence. The woman knew what she was doing. She knew it better than anyone he'd ever served with. And whatever she was, whoever she was the reason they weren't all dead. That didn't mean he had to like it. but it meant he had to accept it. The assault broke at 0714 when the enemy suddenly withdrew, not a fighting retreat, a full disengagement, fast and complete. Within minutes, the shooting had stopped entirely. "What happened?" Flynn asked, his voice shaky. "Why did they stop?" Raven was studying the terrain with an expression that mixed satisfaction with concern. "Air support. Listen." In the distance, growing closer, came the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. "That's friendly," Caleb confirmed, recognizing the signature. "Blackhawks sounds like. Maybe 4. QRF finally got their act together," Noah muttered. "Only took them 2 hours." "They're not QRF." Raven's voice was strange, almost reluctant. "That's a different unit." "How can you tell?" She didn't answer, but something in her posture had changed. The confident command presence she'd maintained throughout the fight seemed to flicker, replaced briefly by something more uncertain, more human. For those who serve or have served, protecting your family's future is a mission that never ends. Military life insurance and veteran financial planning services understand the unique challenges you face. From deployment coverage to transition benefits, specialized veteran insurance providers offer protection that civilian companies simply can't match. Because those who served deserve security. Link in description for veteran-focused financial services. The helicopters appeared over the eastern ridge like angels of deliverance. 4 UH-60 Blackhawks in tactical formation, their door gunners scanning for threats. They swept the area twice before the lead aircraft began its descent toward the damaged Chinook. Everyone emerged from cover, a mixture of relief and exhaustion on their faces. They'd survived. Against all odds, against an enemy that should have overwhelmed them, they'd survived. Mason Webb stood near the tail of the downed helicopter, watching Raven with an expression that mixed grudging respect with lingering confusion. Heather Cross was conspicuously silent, all her earlier criticism apparently forgotten. Flynn Brennan just looked shell-shocked, like a man who'd witnessed something his brain couldn't quite process. The lead Black Hawk touched down, and soldiers in full combat gear began deploying to secure the area, but it was the figure who emerged from the aircraft last who drew every eye. Admiral Elijah Patterson was 62 years old, with silver hair cut military short, and the bearing of a man who had commanded nations' warriors. He wore the stars of his rank with the casualness of long familiarity, but there was nothing casual about the way his eyes immediately found Raven Mitchell among the survivors. "Holy," Caleb Morrison started, then stopped. An admiral, out here, personally leading a rescue mission. That wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Patterson walked toward the group with measured steps, his security detail fanning out around him. Every soldier in the crashed helicopter's crew straightened automatically. Even Mason Webb managed something resembling proper military bearing. But it was what Patterson did next that would be remembered. He stopped directly in front of Raven Mitchell, the small, quiet woman who had been dismissed as a rookie just hours ago. The pilot everyone had tried to push aside. And Admiral Elijah Patterson, 3-star commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, snapped to attention and rendered a salute of such perfect precision that it could have been used as a training example. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent valley. "It's been a while." Raven returned the salute with equal formality. "Admiral, I wasn't expecting to see you out here. When I heard your call sign on the emergency frequencies, I redirected my entire convoy." Patterson's stern face softened slightly. "You sound surprised." "I try to stay off the radar these days." "Yes, well," Patterson glanced at the crashed Chinook, at the defensive positions that had held against impossible odds, at the enemy bodies scattered across the approaches. "You don't seem to be doing a very good job of that." The silence that followed was absolute. 18 people stared at the interaction, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. A 3-star admiral, one of the most powerful figures in the United States military, treating their despised rookie pilot with the kind of respect usually reserved for heads of state. Mason Webb's mouth opened and closed several times. No sound emerged. "Admiral," Captain Holloway said carefully, having been helped to his feet by Fiona, "with respect, sir, what exactly is going on here?" Patterson turned to look at the injured captain. His expression was unreadable. "What's going on, Captain, is that you just spent the last several hours being protected by one of the most decorated special operators in American military history." He paused, letting that sink in. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has 15 years of service with SEAL Team 6. She's conducted operations on 4 continents. She's received commendations that will remain classified until long after everyone in this valley is dead. The words fell like hammer blows into the silence. 15 years. SEAL Team 6, 4 continents. That's... Blake Harris stammered. That's not... The SEALs don't what? Patterson's voice sharpened. Don't have women, don't have warriors who don't fit your preconceptions. He gestured toward Raven. Tell me, Private, did she seem incapable to you when she was landing that helicopter? Did she seem unqualified when she was organizing your defense? Did she seem like someone who didn't belong when she was saving your life? Blake had no answer. None of them did. Caleb Morrison was the first to move. The veteran ranger stepped forward, came to attention, and saluted Raven with all the formality and respect his 22 years of service could muster. Ma'am, it's an honor. One by one, others followed. Jimmy O'Brien, his young face shining with something like worship. Grace Wheeler, tears she couldn't explain streaming down her cheeks. Even Flynn Brennan, who had questioned her every decision, standing straight and rendering his respect. Mason Webb was last. He stood frozen for what felt like eternity, his face a battleground of emotions. Shame, disbelief, grudging admiration, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine respect. Then, slowly, he too came to attention. Ma'am, he said, his voice rough. I said things I shouldn't have said. Raven looked at him for a long moment. The anger that should have been there was absent. In its place was something more complicated, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps understanding. You said what you believed, Staff Sergeant. The problem wasn't your words. It was your beliefs. I know. Mason swallowed hard. I know that now. Good. Raven's voice softened slightly. Then maybe this mission wasn't a complete waste. She turned back to Patterson, her posture shifting subtly from warrior to subordinate. Admiral, we should discuss the tactical situation. We should, Patterson nodded toward one of the Blackhawks. Walk with me. As they moved away from the group, Fiona Hayes found herself standing beside Logan Pierce. The young intelligence analyst was still holding his tablet, his face pale. You knew, Fiona said quietly. You found out. I found fragments, pieces of a puzzle. Logan shook his head. I had no idea how big the picture actually was. None of us did. Behind them, the survivors of the crash were beginning to process what they'd witnessed. The questions would come later. The confusion, the explanations, the inevitable paperwork and debriefings. But for now, in this moment, there was only the stunning realization that everything they thought they knew had been wrong. The rookie pilot who couldn't handle pressure, the woman who didn't belong in a combat zone, the diversity hire who would get them all killed. She was none of those things. She had never been any of those things. And their inability to see past their own assumptions had almost cost them the chance to know the truth. Almost. The moment you've been waiting for is almost here. But before the truth is revealed, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. This story is about to change everything. Share this with someone who loves military stories. Near the helicopter, away from the others, Raven and Patterson walked in silence for a moment. The Admiral's security detail maintained a respectful distance, close enough to protect but far enough to allow privacy. Spectre, Patterson finally said, using a name that made Raven's shoulders tighten. Care to tell me what you're really doing out here? And don't give me the cover story about pilot training assignments. We both know you could fly circles around anyone in the regular aviation units. It's complicated. It always is with you. Patterson stopped, turning to face her. Last I heard, you were supposed to be on medical leave, recovery time after the Yemen operation. I recovered. In 3 months? After what happened to you? The Admiral's voice carried genuine concern beneath the military formality. Raven, you spent 9 days in enemy hands. The things they did are in the past. Her voice was flat, final. I'm operational, I'm cleared, and I'm on mission. What mission? I haven't seen any orders. You wouldn't have. This one comes from higher than your pay grade, Admiral. No offense. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Higher than Spec Warcom? Higher than DOD. The implications hung in the air between them. There weren't many people who outranked the Department of Defense. The very short list that did suggested intelligence operations at the highest levels, the kind of missions that didn't exist on paper and never would. That's why you're on a routine medevac flight? Playing co-pilot to a training captain? Patterson's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "This isn't random, is it? Something on that helicopter is part of your mission." Raven's silence was answer enough. "Or someone," Patterson amended, his sharp eyes scanning back toward the survivors. "There's a target among them. Someone you're watching. Admiral, with respect, you don't want to know more." "You're probably right," Patterson sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. 15 years, Raven. I've watched you go through things that would break most people. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. The operations no one will ever know about. The sacrifices no one will ever thank you for. I didn't do it for thanks. No, you never did. He reached out, placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of genuine affection from a man who rarely showed any. But promise me something. When this mission is done, whatever it is, take some time, real time, find something that isn't war. Raven was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I remember how to do that, sir. Learn. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. You've given enough, Spectre. More than enough. Don't let the mission consume everything you are. Before she could respond, one of the security detail approached with urgent news. Enemy reinforcements had been spotted, moving toward the valley. They needed to evacuate now. The moment passed, lost in the immediate demands of survival. But Patterson's words lingered, settling into a corner of Raven's mind alongside too many other things she tried not to think about. The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Wounded aboard first, then essential personnel, then everyone else in order of tactical priority. The damaged Chinook would be recovered later, or destroyed, depending on the security assessment. Raven found herself on the third helicopter, surrounded by people who looked at her differently now. The contempt was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe, curiosity, and in some cases, shame. Mason Webb sat across from her, his massive frame taking up space that seemed smaller now than it had before. He'd been quiet since her identity was revealed, processing something that clearly challenged everything he thought he knew. "Ma'am," he said finally, the word awkward in his mouth. "Can I ask you something?" Raven nodded slightly. "Why didn't you say anything? When I said those things, why didn't you just tell me who you were?" It was a fair question. The easy answer would have been humility, or professionalism, or mission security. But looking at Mason's face, at the genuine confusion there, Raven found herself giving a different answer. Because it shouldn't matter who I am. My credentials, my history, my rank, none of that should determine whether you treat someone with basic respect. She held his gaze steadily. You didn't disrespect me because I was unqualified. You disrespected me because I was a woman who didn't match your expectations. Learning that I'm actually a SEAL doesn't change that fundamental problem. It just makes it easier for you to justify respecting me now. Mason flinched. It was a small movement, quickly controlled, but Raven saw it. She'd struck somewhere that hurt. The next woman you meet might actually be a rookie, she continued, her voice neither harsh nor gentle, just honest. She might be scared and uncertain, and learning her job for the first time. When that happens, what are you going to do? Wait until she proves she's secretly a special operator before you treat her like a colleague? Mason started, then stopped. There was no good answer, and they both knew it. You have two choices, Raven said. You can see today as the day you learn to respect me specifically, or you can see it as the day you learn to question your assumptions about everyone. The first option is comfortable. The second one is growth. She turned away then, looking out the helicopter's window at the Afghan landscape flowing beneath them. The conversation was over. The lesson had been delivered. What Mason Webb did with it was his choice. But she had a feeling, just a small one, barely visible, that he might actually choose growth. Behind her, Specialist Logan Pierce was watching the exchange with thoughtful eyes. His tablet was dark now, his unauthorized searches completed, and their results stored in memory he'd spend weeks trying to process. He'd found pieces of Raven Mitchell's history, fragments of operations that officially never happened, references to a call sign, Spectre, that appeared in connection with some of the most significant special operations of the past decade. But the thing that stayed with him, the detail that wouldn't let go, was a photograph he'd found in a classified briefing document. It showed 3 people standing in what looked like a hospital room. 2 were clearly military, medical staff based on their dress. The third was Raven Mitchell, barely recognizable, her body covered in wounds that Logan's intelligence training allowed him to identify as torture injuries. The photograph was dated 8 months ago. 8 months. She'd been captured, tortured for over a week, and somehow returned to operational status in less than a year. What kind of person did that? What kind of strength or damage did it take to go through something like that and come back for more? Logan didn't know, but he was beginning to understand that the quiet woman sitting across from him was made of something most people couldn't even imagine. And whatever mission had put her on that Chinook, whatever target she was watching among the survivors, it was far from over. The helicopters banked east, heading toward Bagram in safety. But even as they flew away from danger, Raven Mitchell's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the other passengers with the patience of a predator watching prey. One of them was her target. And this was only the beginning. The Blackhawks touched down at Bagram Airfield at 0847 hours, their rotors kicking up clouds of dust that painted the morning sky in shades of brown and gold. Medical teams were already waiting on the tarmac, stretchers and equipment at the ready for the wounded. Beyond them, a small crowd had gathered, unusual for a routine extraction, but word had apparently spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Something had happened out there, something significant, and everyone wanted to see. Raven Mitchell was among the last to disembark, stepping onto Afghan soil with the careful movements of someone who knew they were being watched. She'd pulled her torn flight suit together as best she could, but the damage was done. The glimpse of her tattoo, the Admiral's salute, the whispered conversations that had filled the helicopter during the flight back. Her cover, 15 months in the making, lay in ruins. Admiral Patterson was already deep in conversation with the base commander, their voices too low to carry. Security personnel had established a perimeter around the landing zone, keeping the curious at a distance. This wasn't going to be a public spectacle, not if Patterson had anything to say about it, but secrets had a way of spreading anyway. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Raven turned to find Captain Holloway approaching, supported by Fiona Hayes on one side. He looked worse in the harsh morning light, pale, drawn, the head wound still seeping despite the bandage. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect, certainly, but also something sharper, more calculating. "Captain, you should be on your way to medical." "I will be." Holloway stopped a few feet away, studying her with an intensity that made lesser people uncomfortable. Raven simply waited. "Before I go, I wanted to say something." "Sir?" "I reviewed your assignment to my aircraft personally. I thought I knew what I was getting. A pilot who needed hours, someone to babysit through a few easy missions." He shook his head slowly. "I had no idea, none at all. That was the point, Captain. I understand that now. What I don't understand is why." Holloway's voice dropped. "You could fly anything in the inventory. You could command any unit you wanted. Why pretend to be something less?" Raven considered her answer carefully. Around them, the chaos of the landing zone continued. Medics rushing past, soldiers securing equipment, the organized pandemonium of military operations. It provided cover for a conversation that shouldn't be overheard. "Sometimes the best way to see the truth is to become invisible," she said finally. "People don't guard their words around someone they consider beneath them. They don't hide their true nature from someone they've already dismissed." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "You were watching someone, on my aircraft, someone specific. It wasn't a question. Captain, I think you should focus on your recovery. That's not a denial. It's not meant to be." Raven glanced toward where the other survivors were being processed. Interviews, medical checks, the standard post-incident protocols. "But what it is, Captain, is a suggestion. Some questions have answers that make life more complicated. Sometimes it's better not to ask." Before Holloway could respond, a medical team arrived to escort him to the field hospital. Fiona helped transfer him to their care, then returned to stand beside Raven. "He's going to keep digging," the doctor observed quietly. "He's that type." "I know. Does that concern you?" Raven watched Holloway being wheeled away, his eyes still fixed on her until distance made it impossible. "It might, depending on what he finds." The next several hours were a blur of debriefings, reports, and carefully managed conversations. Patterson had taken personal charge of the intelligence review, ensuring that Raven's involvement was documented at the appropriate classification level, which meant most of it wouldn't be documented at all. The official record would show that a routine medevac flight encountered enemy fire, made an emergency landing, and successfully defended its position until rescue arrived. The heroics of the co-pilot would be noted but not elaborated upon. That was fine with Raven. She'd learned long ago that the best operations were the ones nobody remembered. But while the official machinery ground forward, unofficial conversations were happening throughout the base. The survivors of the crash were talking, to each other, to friends, to anyone who would listen. The story grew with each telling, accumulating details and embellishments like a snowball rolling downhill. By noon, half of Bagram had heard some version of events. By evening, it had spread to 3 other bases. The rookie pilot who turned out to be a SEAL, the woman they mocked who saved their lives, the 15-year veteran hiding in plain sight. It was exactly the kind of attention Raven's mission couldn't afford. She found Patterson in his temporary office, a converted storage room that had been hastily furnished with a desk and secure communications equipment. His security detail stood outside, professionally disinterested in the conversation happening within. "We have a problem," Raven said without preamble. "Several, actually." Patterson gestured for her to sit. "Your cover is compromised. Your presence on that helicopter is now common knowledge. And somewhere out there, someone is wondering why a DevGru operator was masquerading as a training pilot. The target will know I'm watching. Assuming the target is even aware of the original operation, which we can't confirm." Raven sat, her posture rigid. "What's the guidance from Washington? Proceed with caution. They're not pulling you out, too much invested, too many threads to follow, but the approach will need to change." Patterson leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly tired. "They want you to continue the investigation in a different capacity, something more visible." "Visible how?" "There's been a request from Central Command. They want someone to conduct a review of personnel security protocols across multiple bases. Someone with special operations experience who can identify vulnerabilities from an insider's perspective." Patterson smiled thinly. "It seems your skills have attracted attention at the highest levels." "That's convenient. That's politics. Someone up the chain saw an opportunity. Your cover gets blown, so they pivot, turn you into an official asset instead of a hidden one. Different approach, same objective." Raven processed this information, running scenarios in her mind. It could work. A security review would give her access to personnel records, travel histories, communication patterns, all the data she needed to identify the leak. The target would know she was looking, yes, but they might also get careless, confident that a formal investigation couldn't touch them. "The passengers from the helicopter," she said. "Where are they now?" "Being processed through normal channels. Medical evaluations, incident reports, the usual bureaucracy." Patterson pulled up a file on his computer. "I've flagged the ones you identified as priorities. They'll be held here for additional debriefing. Nothing unusual, just standard protocol for an extended engagement." "How long?" 48 hours minimum. "Enough time for you to review their files, conduct preliminary interviews." Patterson's expression grew serious. "Raven, I have to ask, how certain are you that the target is among them?" 93%. That's oddly specific. It's based on analysis of communication intercepts, travel patterns, and access logs over the past 18 months. Someone in that group has been passing information to hostile networks. The attack on our helicopter wasn't random, it was too well coordinated, too precisely timed. They knew our route, they knew our capabilities. Patterson absorbed this. "You think the leak tipped them off?" "I think the leak is the reason they were on that helicopter in the first place. The target requested assignment to that specific mission. I confirmed my own assignment to match." "And the RPG attack?" "Either the target's handlers decided to eliminate them along with the rest of us, burned asset cleanup, or the target deliberately arranged for an attack they expected to survive, creating cover for their presence in case anyone got suspicious. That's cold-blooded. That's tradecraft." Raven's voice carried no judgment, only clinical assessment. "Whoever we're dealing with, they're sophisticated, trained. This isn't an amateur selling secrets for money. This is someone who knows the game." The weight of that statement hung between them. If Raven was right, they were hunting a professional, someone embedded deep in military operations, someone who had been passing information to enemies for years without detection, someone who had gotten American soldiers killed. "What do you need from me?" Patterson asked. "Access, authority, and time." Raven stood. "I need to talk to each of the survivors individually. Detailed interviews, the kind that go beyond incident reports. I need to see their personnel files, their communication histories, their financial records. That last one will require warrants." "Then get warrants, or find someone who can." Patterson nodded slowly. "I'll make calls, but Raven, He paused, choosing his words carefully. These people just survived a significant trauma. Some of them are I don't know what to call them. People who mistreated you, people who said ugly things. I remember. I know you do, but your investigation needs to be clean, professional. If there's any hint of personal motivation, any suggestion that you're using this as payback... Admiral, Raven's voice was cold. I spent 15 years separating personal feelings from professional duty. I've conducted interrogations on people who killed my friends, and I did it by the book because the mission required it. I'm not going to compromise an investigation because someone called me names. Patterson held up his hands in acknowledgement. Fair enough, I had to say it. Understood. She moved toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing. Staff Sergeant Webb. I want to interview him last. Any particular reason? He's either the target or he's the perfect distraction. Either way, I want to know everything about everyone else before I talk to him again. With that, she left Patterson to his phone calls and stepped back into the Afghan sun. Many veterans struggle with the transition to civilian careers, but it doesn't have to be that way. Online certification programs specifically designed for veterans can translate your military experience into civilian credentials. From project management to cybersecurity, these programs understand military training and help you leverage it. GI Bill approved options available. Check the description for veteran career transition programs that actually work. The interviews began that evening. Raven conducted them in a small room adjacent to the base's administrative center. Bare walls, single table, 2 chairs. Recording equipment sat openly on the table. Nothing about this process would be hidden. These were formal interviews, documented and witnessed, part of the official investigation into the incident. What the subjects didn't know was that Raven was looking for something beyond their accounts of the crash. She was reading their body language, analyzing their word choices, watching for the micro-expressions that revealed hidden truths. 15 years of training had turned her into a human lie detector. Not perfect, but close enough to matter. Private First Class Blake Harris was first. He entered the room with the nervous energy of someone who knew they'd done something wrong, even if that something was limited to running his mouth. Ma'am, he sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. I want to start by apologizing for what I said during everything. It was disrespectful and inappropriate, and I have no excuse. Apology noted. Raven's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Let's focus on the incident itself. Take me through your experience from the moment we took fire. Blake did, haltingly at first, then with increasing detail as he fell into the rhythm of the narrative. His account was consistent with the others Raven had already heard. The explosion, the chaos, the terror. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that suggested foreknowledge or unusual behavior. But when Raven asked about his background, his assignment history, how he came to be on that particular helicopter, something changed. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just a slight tension in his shoulders, a half-second delay before answers. I requested the assignment, Blake admitted. Wanted to get some medevac experience on my record. Career progression, you know? When did you submit the request? About 3 weeks ago, I think, maybe a month. Through normal channels? Of course, everything by the book. Raven made a note. The timing was interesting. Her own intelligence had suggested the leak's handlers typically needed 2 to 4 weeks to coordinate operations. If Blake had requested assignment a month ago, that would fit the window, but it would also fit hundreds of other innocent explanations. Career-minded soldiers requested specific assignments all the time. Without more evidence, Blake Harris was suspicious but not conclusive. She moved through the others methodically. Specialist Flynn Brennan, whose technical knowledge and access to flight systems could theoretically enable the kind of intelligence the enemy had possessed. Sergeant First Class Heather Cross, whose bitterness and resentment might mask something darker. Private Jimmy O'Brien, too young and seemingly too innocent to be a spy, but also exactly the type of profile a sophisticated handler might cultivate. Each interview revealed pieces of the puzzle. None revealed the complete picture. By midnight, Raven had spoken to 12 of the 17 potential subjects. Her notes filled pages, her suspicions shifted and reformed like clouds, and she was no closer to certainty than when she'd started. She took a break, stepping outside into the cool Afghan night. The stars above Bagram were magnificent, one of the few beautiful things about this place, and she found herself staring upward, letting her mind process everything she'd learned. Can't sleep either? Raven turned to find Caleb Morrison approaching, 2 cups of coffee in hand. The veteran ranger moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned the right to be comfortable in any environment. "Master Sergeant, you should be resting." "Tried. Mind won't shut off." He offered one of the cups. "Figured you might feel the same." She accepted the coffee, military standard, thick enough to stand a spoon in, and they stood in companionable silence for a moment. "I've been watching you," Caleb said eventually. "All day. You're not just investigating what happened out there. You're investigating who." Raven said nothing. 22 years in the Rangers," he continued. "I've worked alongside enough intelligence types to recognize the signs. The interviews aren't just debriefs, they're interrogations. You're looking for something specific. You're observant. Comes with the territory." Caleb took a sip of his coffee. "I'm also smart enough to know that whatever you're looking for, you probably can't tell me. But I want you to know something." "What's that?" "If there's a snake among us, someone who got our people hurt, I want them found." His voice hardened. "I've buried too many friends because of leaks and compromised operations. If one of the people on that helicopter is responsible for what happened, you won't find a more willing ally than me." Raven studied him in the dim light. His service record was impeccable. 2 decades of exemplary performance, multiple commendations, no red flags. Of all the survivors, he was the least likely to be the target, which, a paranoid voice in her head whispered, is exactly what a well-placed mole would look like. "I appreciate that, Master Sergeant. Caleb, after what we went through, I think we've earned first names." A ghost of a smile crossed Raven's face. "Caleb, if there's a snake, I'll find them. That's what I do. I believe you will." He finished his coffee, crumpled the cup. "One more thing. Webb, Mason Webb. I've served with him for 3 years. He's an idiot sometimes, and he's got some attitudes that need adjusting, but he's not a traitor. Whatever else you're looking at, I'd bet my pension on that. Your assessment is noted. Just wanted you to have it." Caleb turned to leave, then paused. "Ma'am, Raven, for what it's worth, watching you work out there was something special. Whatever happens with this investigation, don't let anyone tell you that you haven't earned your place. You've earned it 100 times over." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the darkness between buildings. Raven returned to her notes. The interview with Mason Webb took place at 0900 the following morning. He entered the room with a different posture than the others, shoulders squared, chin up, the defiant bearing of someone who expected to be attacked and was prepared to defend himself. "Ma'am?" He sat without being asked, meeting her eyes directly. "I figure we should get something out of the way first." "Go ahead." "I was wrong. About you, about women in combat, about a lot of things. I've been thinking about what you said on the helicopter, about assumptions and respect. And you were right. What I did wasn't just insulting to you personally. It was insulting to every woman who's ever served. And I'm ashamed of it." Raven let the silence stretch. This wasn't the Mason Webb she'd expected, the blustering defensive man who'd grabbed her shoulder and demanded she surrender the controls. This was someone who'd actually reflected on his behavior and found it wanting. That's a significant change in 48 hours. Getting your life saved by someone you've disrespected has a way of focusing the mind. Mason's jaw tightened. "I've been in the Army for 18 years. I've seen combat. I've led soldiers in situations where people died. And the whole time, I had this idea in my head about what warriors looked like, what they sounded like, how they acted. And I didn't fit that image. No, ma'am, you didn't. So, instead of questioning my image, I questioned you." He shook his head. "That's not just wrong, it's dangerous. In combat, you need to trust the people around you. If I can't see past my own prejudices to recognize competence when it's right in front of me, then I'm a liability. What do you intend to do about it?" "Whatever I have to. Training, counseling, whatever the Army wants to throw at me." Mason leaned forward slightly. "But I also want to do something else, if you'll allow it." "I'm listening." "I want to tell this story, not to make myself look good. I come out looking like exactly the fool I was, but to show other people what I learned. There are a lot of guys like me out there, guys who think they know what a warrior looks like. Maybe if they hear about what happened, about how wrong I was, some of them will start questioning their assumptions before someone has to save their lives to prove the point." Raven considered this. It was, she had to admit, an unexpectedly mature response. The Mason Webb of 2 days ago would have made excuses, deflected blame, found ways to minimize his culpability. This Mason Webb was taking full ownership and looking for ways to prevent others from making the same mistakes. That would be your choice, Staff Sergeant. I'm not in the business of managing people's public narratives. Understood, ma'am. He paused. Is there anything else you need from me for the investigation? Here it was, the moment she'd been building toward. Raven shifted her approach, moving from conversation to interrogation with a subtlety that most people wouldn't notice. Tell me about your assignment to this mission. How did it come about? Mason shrugged. Routine rotation? My unit was scheduled for escort duty, and the medevac flight needed additional security. You didn't request the assignment specifically? No, ma'am, it was just where the board put me. His body language remained open, relaxed. No micro-expressions of deception, no subtle shifts in posture. Either Mason Webb was an exceptional liar, unlikely given his earlier transparent hostility, or he was telling the truth. Raven moved through the rest of her questions methodically, probing his background, his access to sensitive information, his communications with anyone outside normal channels. Nothing. No red flags, no suspicious patterns. By the end of the interview, she was reasonably confident that Mason Webb was exactly what he appeared to be. A flawed man with outdated attitudes who had been given a harsh lesson in humility. Not a spy, not a traitor, just a soldier who needed to grow up. One more thing, she said as he stood to leave. Your assessment of the other survivors. Anyone behave strangely before or during the incident? Anyone who seemed to know something they shouldn't? Mason thought for a moment. Nothing obvious, but there was one thing. Probably nothing. But when we first came under fire, before everything went crazy, I saw Specialist Pierce with his tablet. He was tapping away at something, real focused. I figured he was trying to send a distress signal or something, but in retrospect it seemed, I don't know, urgent in a different way. Logan Pierce. Yes, ma'am. Like I said, probably nothing. He's intel. They're always tapping at something. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. You're dismissed. Mason left, and Raven sat alone with her thoughts. Logan Pierce, the intelligence analyst who had discovered her identity, the one who had been running searches, digging into classified files, asking questions. At the time, she'd assumed he was simply curious, a natural response for someone trained to gather information. But what if there was another explanation? What if his searches weren't about uncovering her identity, but about confirming it? What if he'd been watching her as closely as she'd been watching everyone else? Raven pulled up Pierce's file on her tablet and began to read with fresh eyes. Now that you've seen what Raven is truly capable of, I know you want more. We have another incredible story coming next week that will blow your mind. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Leave a comment telling me your favorite moment from today's story. The picture that emerged from Logan Pierce's records was both impressive and troubling. Age 26. Intelligence analyst with a specialty in signals, intelligence, and pattern recognition. Top scores in every evaluation. Fluent in 3 languages, conversant in 2 more. Access to classified materials at levels unusual for someone of his rank. And gaps. Small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Periods of temporary assignment to units that didn't quite exist. Training courses with vague descriptions and no documented outcomes. The fingerprints of special access programs that operated outside normal oversight. He wasn't just an analyst. He was, or had been, something more. Raven's instincts prickled. Everything about Pierce fit the profile of either a highly valuable asset or a carefully cultivated mole. His skills would make him excellent at either role. His access would make him dangerous at either role. She needed more information. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. It was Fiona Hayes, looking tired but determined. Lieutenant Commander, do you have a moment? Doctor? Come in. Fiona sat in the chair recently vacated by Mason, her medical bag still hanging from her shoulder. I wanted to check on you before I ship out. They're sending me back to Kandahar this afternoon. I'm fine. With respect, that's not what I meant. Fiona's eyes were sharp, assessing. I've treated a lot of special operators over the years. I know what the job does to people, the isolation, the constant vigilance, the inability to trust anyone fully. I appreciate your concern. I'm not finished. Fiona leaned forward. When I saw those scars on your wrists, I recognized them for what they were. You were captured at some point, held for long enough to leave marks like that. And then you came back to duty, How soon? A few months? Less? Raven said nothing. I've read the studies on operator resilience. I know what's expected of people in your position. But there's a difference between being resilient and being dissociated, between processing trauma and burying it. Doctor, this really isn't... I'm going to leave you my contact information. Fiona placed a card on the table. If you ever want to talk, not as a physician, just as someone who's seen too much and understands, I'm available. No judgment, no reports, just conversation. Raven looked at the card. It sat on the table like an accusation, a reminder of everything she refused to acknowledge about her own mental state. Thank you, she said finally. I'll keep it in mind. Fiona stood, recognizing a dismissal when she heard one, but at the door, she paused. One more thing. You asked earlier if I noticed anything unusual during the incident. I've been thinking about it. And? Before the first RPG hit, maybe 30 seconds before, I saw Specialist Pierce receive a message on his tablet. He read it, and his face went pale. Then he looked at you, specifically at you, and then the explosion happened. He looked at me, just for a second, but it was... I don't know how to describe it, like he was confirming something. Fiona shrugged. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe he'd just found out something about you through his searches, but it struck me as odd. Thank you, Doctor. That's very helpful. After Fiona left, Raven sat in silence, fitting pieces together. Pierce had received a message. Pierce had looked at her. Then the attack had begun. Coincidence was possible. In the chaos of combat, people noticed things out of sequence, misremembered timelines, created patterns that weren't really there. But Raven didn't believe in coincidence. Not in her line of work. She picked up her secure phone and dialed a number from memory. It was answered on the second ring. This is Spectre. I need a deep pull on Specialist Logan Pierce, currently assigned to intelligence analysis at Bagram. Everything. Family, finances, communications, travel. I want to know what he had for breakfast every day for the past 2 years. The voice on the other end acknowledged without question. This was how it worked at her level. Requests were fulfilled, not debated. And one more thing, Raven added. I need access to signal intercepts from the hour before our helicopter was hit. Specifically, any transmissions that could have reached a device on the aircraft. Timeline for delivery? Yesterday. She ended the call and stared at the wall, mind racing through possibilities. If Pierce was the leak, he'd played a masterful game. His apparent discovery of her identity wasn't accidental investigation, it was cover. By revealing that he knew who she was, he'd positioned himself as helpful, transparent, the opposite of suspicious. And his technical skills would have made it child's play to receive an encrypted warning about the impending attack. But if he wasn't the leak, then Raven was about to destroy the career of an innocent soldier based on circumstantial evidence and paranoid speculation. She needed proof, hard, undeniable proof. And she had less than 24 hours to find it. The next 18 hours were a blur of data analysis, secure communications, and carefully orchestrated surveillance. Raven worked through the night, piecing together the fragments that her network provided. Logan Pierce's financial records were clean, too clean, actually, for someone who occasionally gambled online and had college debt. There were no unexplained deposits, no suspicious withdrawals, no evidence of the kind of payments that typically accompanied espionage. His communications were similarly unremarkable. Emails to family, messages to friends, the occasional flirtation through dating apps. Nothing that suggested contact with foreign handlers or criminal networks. But there was one anomaly, a small one, easily overlooked. Pierce's tablet, the device he'd been using during the helicopter flight, had a secondary communication capability that wasn't standard issue, a modification that allowed it to receive encrypted transmissions on frequencies outside normal military bands. It wasn't illegal, exactly. Intelligence analysts sometimes use such modifications for legitimate purposes, but it was unusual, and it was exactly the kind of capability that would allow someone to receive warnings from outside the chain of command. At 0400, Raven's secure phone buzzed with an incoming file, the signal intercepts she'd requested. She opened the file and began to read. Most of it was noise, routine military communications, civilian traffic, the electronic chatter of a war zone. But buried in the data, 37 seconds before the first RPG struck, there was a transmission, encrypted, short burst, directed at a frequency that matched the modification on Pierce's tablet. The message, once decoded, contained 3 words: Spectre confirmed, execute. Raven stared at the screen, her heart rate elevated for the first time in days. There it was, the proof she'd been looking for. Someone had confirmed her presence on the helicopter and ordered the attack. Someone had tried to kill her specifically, not just the aircraft, but the message hadn't originated from Pierce's tablet. It had been received by it, which meant Pierce wasn't the source of the leak. He was the recipient of information from someone else. Someone who had access to real-time intelligence about who was on that helicopter and why. Someone who was still out there. Raven's mind raced through the implications. Pierce had received the warning, but hadn't acted on it, hadn't tried to escape, hadn't warned anyone, had simply gone pale and waited for the attack. That suggested he wasn't a willing participant. More likely, he was being used. An unwitting relay point for information, his modified tablet compromised without his knowledge. But who had sent the message, and how had they known about Spectre? The answer, when it came to her, was chilling in its simplicity. There was only one group of people who knew Raven Mitchell's operational call sign, only one circle with access to that information. The leak wasn't among the survivors of the helicopter crash. The leak was inside her own organization. Dawn broke over Bagram with the muted colors of dust and exhaustion. Raven stood outside the administrative building, secure phone pressed to her ear, delivering a report that would reshape the entire investigation. Confirmed, she said. The penetration is at headquarters level. Someone with access to operational planning knew about my assignment and targeted me specifically. The voice on the other end was Admiral Patterson, his tone grim. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. I have the intercept data. I have the technical analysis. Someone inside JSOC or higher wanted me dead, and they were willing to sacrifice an entire helicopter full of soldiers to make it happen. Patterson was silent for a long moment. What do you recommend? Compartmentalization. Immediate. No one outside this conversation knows that I've identified the source level of the leak. I continue my cover investigation here, appear to be focused on the survivors, while a separate team works the headquarters angle. That will take time to coordinate, time we might not have. Whoever did this will know the attack failed. They'll be preparing their next move. Understood. I'll initiate the necessary protocols. Patterson paused. Raven, if this is what you say it is, a mole at the highest levels, then you're in more danger than ever. They'll try again. Let them. Raven's voice was flat, cold, the voice of someone who had stopped being afraid of death a long time ago. I've survived worse. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. She looked out across the airfield, watching the morning activity begin. Soldiers moving to their duties, aircraft being prepped for the day's missions, the endless machinery of war grinding forward. Admiral, there's something else. The survivors from the helicopter, they're not targets anymore, but they're witnesses. Someone might decide to clean up loose ends. I'll arrange enhanced security. Make it discreet. We don't want to tip off whoever's watching. Agreed. Patterson's voice softened slightly. And Raven, watch your back. You're one of the best I've ever worked with. I'd hate to lose you. I'll do my best, sir. She ended the call and stood in the growing light, processing everything that had changed in the last 24 hours. She'd come to Afghanistan hunting a leak among soldiers. She'd found something far worse, a betrayal at the heart of the special operations community itself. Someone with stars on their shoulders or a corner office in Washington was selling information to enemies, and they'd tried to kill her when she got too close. The mission had just gotten a lot more complicated, and a lot more personal. 3 hours later, Raven stood on the tarmac as the survivors of the helicopter crash prepared to ship out. Most were returning to their regular units, their brush with death destined to become a war story told over beers. A few, the ones with minor injuries, were heading stateside for recovery and evaluation. Mason Webb found her before he boarded his flight. Ma'am. He came to attention, rendered a salute that would have satisfied any drill instructor. I wanted to thank you. For everything. Raven returned the salute. Stay safe, Staff Sergeant. I will. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said, about telling the story, about using what happened to teach others. I believe you did. It won't fix everything, I know that, but maybe it's a start. Starts are all any of us get. What matters is what we do with them. Mason nodded slowly, then turned and walked toward the waiting aircraft. He moved differently now than he had 2 days ago, shoulders less rigid, stride more measured. The experience had changed him, Whether that change would last remained to be seen, but for now, it was something. Jimmy O'Brien was next, bounding up with the irrepressible energy of youth. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say this was the craziest, scariest, most amazing thing that's ever happened to me. And you were incredible. Like, seriously incredible." Despite everything, Raven felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Stay that enthusiastic, Private. The world needs people who can find amazing in the middle of scary." "I will, ma'am. I definitely will." He executed a slightly sloppy salute, endearing in its earnestness, and jogged off to join his unit. Caleb Morrison approached last. The veteran ranger had the look of someone who had seen the end of something and was already thinking about what came next. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked quietly. "No, it's not. Figured as much. The way you've been working, the calls you've been making, this is bigger than one helicopter." Raven met his eyes. "Caleb, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this conversation. Understood?" "Understood. The attack on our helicopter wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone knew I was on board and wanted me dead. Someone with access to information they shouldn't have." Caleb's face hardened. "A leak. At a level higher than anyone on that helicopter. I'm still working to identify them, but the investigation is complicated. What do you need from me?" "Vigilance. The survivors aren't targets anymore, but that could change if whoever's behind this gets nervous. Keep your eyes open. Trust your instincts. And if anything seems off, you have my number." Caleb nodded slowly. "You got it." He extended his hand, and Raven shook it. "It was an honor serving with you, Raven, even if it was only for one very long night." "The honor was mine, Caleb. Stay safe out there. You too." He walked away, leaving Raven alone on the tarmac as the last aircraft lifted off, carrying the survivors back to their lives. But for her, the mission continued. That evening, Raven sat alone in her quarters, a small room in the transient housing block, barely large enough for a bed and a desk. Her tablet displayed the latest intelligence updates, but her mind was elsewhere. On the wall beside her bed, she'd taped a single photograph. It showed a group of operators in full combat gear, faces obscured by tactical equipment, standing in front of a compound somewhere in the Middle East. The image was from 5 years ago, a mission that had ended badly. Half the people in that photo were dead now, casualties of a war that never seemed to end. She was the only woman in the picture. Her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. Encrypted, high priority, routed through channels that didn't officially exist. Phase 2, authorized. Proceed to Washington. Briefing scheduled 72 hours. Raven stared at the words, understanding their implications. She was being recalled. The investigation into the helicopter attack had been elevated to the highest levels, and she would be at the center of it. Somewhere in Washington, a traitor sat in a position of power, someone who had access to the nation's most sensitive secrets, someone who had tried to have her killed and would certainly try again. She would find them. However long it took, however deep she had to dig, she would find them and bring them to justice. That was what she did. That was who she was. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. She palmed her sidearm, habit, automatic, and moved to the door. Logan Pierce stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Lieutenant Commander, can we talk?" Raven studied him for a moment, reading his body language, assessing his threat potential. He seemed nervous, but not dangerous, confused, but not deceptive. "Come in." Pierce entered the small room, glancing around with the trained eye of an intelligence professional, taking in details, noting exits, categorizing threats. It was instinctive, the same way Raven did it herself. "I know you've been investigating me," he said without preamble. "I know you found the modification on my tablet, and I know you know about the transmission I received before the attack." Raven's hand remained near her weapon. "You've been busy. I'm an intelligence analyst. Figuring things out is literally my job." Pierce sat on the edge of her bed, uninvited, but clearly too exhausted to remain standing. "I didn't know about the modification. Someone installed it without my knowledge, probably during a routine maintenance cycle. I've been trying to figure out who and why ever since you started asking questions." "And what have you found?" "Nothing concrete, but I have theories." He looked up at her, and there was something haunted in his eyes. "Lieutenant Commander, I think I've been used. I think someone has been routing information through my devices for months, maybe longer, using me as a cutout without my knowledge. That's convenient. It's terrifying, is what it is. Pierce's voice cracked slightly. I joined intelligence because I wanted to protect this country. The idea that I've been helping someone betray it, even unknowingly, makes me sick. Raven watched him carefully. Every instinct she had said he was telling the truth. His distress was genuine, his confusion authentic. He wasn't a traitor, he was a victim, but she hadn't survived 15 years by trusting her instincts completely. You'll need to come to Washington, she said. There will be a full technical analysis of your devices, polygraphs, interviews that make what I put you through look like casual conversation. I expected as much. And depending on what they find, your career might be over. Even if you're innocent, the fact that you were compromised could end your access permanently. Pierce nodded slowly. I've thought about that. If that's the price of helping find the real traitor, I'll pay it. Why? Because 18 people almost died because of information that passed through my equipment. Because soldiers are dying every day because of leaks we haven't plugged. Because if I can help stop it, even at the cost of everything I've worked for, then that's what I should do. Raven was silent for a long moment. Then she holstered her weapon. Get some sleep, specialist. We leave for Washington in 6 hours. It's going to be a long few weeks. Pierce stood, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thank you, ma'am, for believing me. I didn't say I believed you. I said I'm willing to let the investigation determine the truth. Raven moved to open the door. But for what it's worth, I hope you're exactly who you appear to be. So do I, ma'am. So do I. After he left, Raven stood at the window, looking out at the Afghan night. Stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. The same stars that had watched over this land through countless wars and invasions. She thought about the message on her phone, Phase 2, Washington, a hunt that would take her into the halls of power among people who smiled while plotting murder. She thought about the photograph on her wall, the friends she'd lost, the sacrifices they'd made. She thought about Mason Webb's transformation, Jimmy O'Brien's enthusiasm, Caleb Morrison's quiet strength, Fiona Hayes's concern, all the people she'd encountered in the last 2 days, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. And she thought about the person she used to be, before 15 years of war had carved away everything soft and left only the warrior behind. Admiral Patterson's words echoed in her mind. Don't let the mission consume everything you are. But what was she, really, beyond the mission? What remained when you stripped away the training, the discipline, the endless vigilance? She didn't know anymore. Maybe she'd never known. The phone buzzed again. A new message. Additional intel attached. 3 suspects identified at senior level. High probability 1 is primary leak. Extreme caution advised. Trust no one. Raven downloaded the file and began to read. 3 names. 3 decorated officers with impeccable records and unquestioned patriotism. One of them was a traitor who had gotten Americans killed and would continue to do so until stopped. She would stop them, whatever it took, however long it required. She would find the truth and expose it, because that was what warriors did. Not the warriors who sought glory or recognition, not the ones who needed medals and parades, but the quiet ones, the invisible ones. The ones who did the job because it needed doing, and asked nothing in return except the chance to keep doing it. Raven Mitchell, Lieutenant Commander, Navy SEAL, DevGru, began planning her next move. Outside, the Afghan stars continued their eternal rotation, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath them. And somewhere, in an office or a mansion or a secure facility, a traitor went about their business, unaware that the ghost they'd tried to kill was coming for them. The hunt was just beginning. 3 months later, a secure facility outside Washington would host a classified briefing. Attendees would include the highest levels of military and intelligence leadership. They would hear testimony, they would review evidence, they would witness the exposure of a conspiracy that had cost dozens of American lives. And at the center of it all, quiet and unremarkable as always, would be a woman most of them had never noticed. A woman who had been dismissed as a rookie. A woman who had saved 18 lives in an Afghan valley. A woman who had followed the trail from a crashed helicopter to the corridors of power. They would finally see her then, finally understand what she was capable of, and by then, it would be far too late to stop her. But that is another story. For now, as dawn broke over Bagram one final time, Raven Mitchell gathered her few possessions and prepared to board the aircraft that would carry her toward the next mission. Behind her, she left 18 people whose lives would never be quite the same. Ahead of her waited an enemy who had no idea what was coming. And in between, in the quiet spaces where warriors do their work, the truth waited to be found. It always did, for those patient enough to seek it.